We love to put things into boxes. I don't mean like moving boxes either. I'm talking about mental concepts. We like to put everyone who has a certain belief into the same box. We like to put everyone who behaves a certain way into the same exact box, regardless of their other traits, their other beliefs, of their other actions. We do this as a coping mechanism. We're trying to make sense of the world, and we're scared of uncertainty. By categorizing things into simple boxes and responding to everything coming out of that box in the same way, we gain control over our world a little bit. And it makes the world less scary. We're programmed to do this from tens of thousands of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago. Without this mechanism, we would wander into the wrong area and get eaten by a tiger. We would trust the wrong people who would hurt us. We would eat the wrong berries or mushrooms. But we do it to other people a lot, especially in the modern age when people and attention given to people means a lot more now than it used to. Used to, you only ever saw maybe 200-300 people in your life, unless you were wealthy and could travel, or you got conscripted into an army. So it was useful for us to categorize people. Of course, this is an oversimplification of things and can never truly fully grasp the complexities of the human model, of the human experience. I'm guilty of it too. I have my own framework that I use to sort people. This framework is called protectors versus punishers. Now, it's not a hard line in the sand ethos that I live by day to day, and I judge every single person using this methodology. It's more of a mental exercise or a thought experiment. Now, just by the name alone, you may have already decided which side you fall on. I bet a lot of you are thinking, oh, I'm a protector. But let me run through it because, to be honest, my gut instinct is that I'm a protector, but I honestly don't know. So to begin, let's draw a line. And on the far left of this line, we'll put the word protector, and on the far right, we'll put the word punisher. I believe everyone falls along that line. And in a minute, we'll talk about the test that determines which side of the line you're on. But before we do, let's talk about these two categories for a minute. Punishers are people who have a very strict internal set of rules they follow. And I don't mean to say that autistic people are punishers, but it's been observed that many autistic people have a very similar set of rules that they follow internally, and it causes them distress when people break them. And it's one of the things that they have to kind of come to terms with as they mature and try to integrate more and more into society. They have to come to terms with, hey, your internal rules are not obvious to everyone else. And you can't really expect everyone to follow them all the time. And so to protect yourself, you need to learn to kind of release your tight grip on those rules. And punishers, they have the same setup. They have a set of rules that they follow. Typically, those are taught to them, though. They're not something that they develop internally. In some cases, they are, but the rules are not even the important thing in this system, though. It's really punishers believe in a system. They believe in an order that if everyone follows it, everyone will do better and less harm will come to everyone in the community. And you are actually hurting the community as a whole when you break these rules and when you go against them, because you're weakening the system. And the system is this sort of shared belief, this social phantasmagoria that we adhere to, and it's designed to keep us safe. It doesn't matter to the punisher if the system occasionally hurts individuals, because far more hurt or harm would be created if the system weakens or falls apart. Because without the system, then you have chaos, and chaos leads to more and more people being hurt. In a sense, you could say that punishers aren't really punishment driven. They are group protectors. And they believe in the group over the individual because they believe the individual benefits the most from being in a strong, cohesive group. Protectors, on the other hand, and I'm going to use pretty harsh language, not like curse words, but I'm going to sound harsh to them. Protectors are more than willing to break rules. In fact, they kind of revel in it. They see the system as being oppressive, especially when it hurts people. And if a system hurts people, then it's not a good system. In a sense, they're utopianists, or they are idealists. They believe that if a system fails one person, it fails everyone. To the protector, the individual matters more than the system, because if the individual isn't being treated fairly and righteously, then the system is worthless. Now, you can have altruistic punishers and you can have selfish protectors. And what does that look like? An altruistic punisher may be willing to go to any lengths to keep the system from hurting people up until the point where they dismantle the system. They don't want to do that. A selfish protector, on the other hand, is willing to break the rules for their own benefit no matter what. If they see something, they'll take it. There's a rule that hampers them, they'll break it. A lot of times, protectors of this type can be narcissists, and they just think that they're better than the system and they should be allowed to do whatever they want and not get any punishment or comeuppance. So you might think that protectors are rule breakers and punishers are rule followers, or that protectors are lone wolves and punishers are just sheep. But it goes deeper than that. It has nothing to do with the eagerness to inflict justice either, or revenge or punishment for that matter. So I've struggled with the naming of this system, but I find that it still fits, even though it really isn't about punishment per se. Punishers don't get off on punishing people. They just think it's the best outcome. So I mentioned earlier there's a scenario that kind of measures how much of a punisher or a protector someone is. And that scenario is that there are 100 people going to prison. Some of them are violent criminals. Some of them are non-violent criminals, but they still broke the law. And a handful of them, maybe let's say 5 of them, are actually innocent. And let's say that you knew that 95 of them were guilty and deserved to be punished, and 5 of them were completely innocent and did not deserve to be punished. Hardline 100% punisher would be willing to leave those 5 people that are innocent in jail as a necessary sacrifice to ensure the system functions and keep the other 95 criminals properly punished. You know, those 95 criminals, among them may be serial killers, rapists, child abusers. The 5 innocents, because they don't know who's innocent and who's guilty, they're willing to sacrifice those 5 to make sure that the worst of those criminals don't get out and hurt more people. On the other hand, a protector, like a all-the-way protector, 100% protector, would set all 100 people free to ensure we didn't unjustly punish those 5 innocent people. It brings them great distress to know that the system failed those 5 people. And they're willing to reset everything and start over to make sure that they don't put them through that agony of, no one believing them and being thrown in prison with all these criminals for doing nothing but being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or just falsely accused by an overzealous, prosecutor. But the protectors can't abide by anyone suffering. In fact, a 100% protector would let them all go if there was one innocent person being punished. And I guess their idea would be they would put ankle monitors on everyone and try and catch and repunish the truly bad people. But those innocent people got to get out in the protector's mind. Now, a lot of what this hypothesis is based on is really what someone is willing to actively do. The punisher is not willing to actively free the guilty to save the innocent. The guilty are locked up. They're where they should be. If innocent people got hurt, a small number of innocent people got hurt, that's a necessary sacrifice to ensure that the system functions. And the protector is not willing to actively lock up those innocent people just to get rid of the guilty. The protector has to save those innocents, and they have to get them out. And they have to figure out who's who. Each side has to act based on their ethos, you know. Now, there probably aren't many 100% all the way people of either type. There probably are a few in this world, but I think everyone falls on the spectrum, and where you are depends on, I think, crudely, how many people it would take for you to throw the prison doors open and let them out. If it's 5 people, then you're very much almost all the way a protector. If it's 49 people, then you're a punisher. You know, if 49 innocent people and 51 guilty people were in jail and you didn't know who was who, see, I would let them out at that point, because a 51% success rate is not high enough for me. The system is actually broken, in my opinion, if that's the case. And a 49% failure rate is way too high. But I don't actually know where my line would be. 5 is actually close. 1 is, I'm sorry, but 1 person in jail, I'm not going to free serial killers, to save that person. Then again, it depends on who it was. If it was someone that I knew and cared about, I might. So when I think of the experiment, I think I fall on the Punisher side. But emotionally, I want to be a protector and I want to save the innocent people. But at what cost, In any event, this isn't going to actually happen. And it's just a thought experiment. Speaking of thought experiments, there's another one that I think about to this day. And it's called Torture versus Dust Specks. And it was written on a blog about 17, 18 years ago. And it's a famous thought experiment on the internet that goes like this. You have an unfathomably large group of people. And for the sake of the argument, let's say you have 1 Googleplex worth of people. And a Googleplex is 1 followed by 100 zeros raised to the power of 100. Which is, the mind can't even wrap around that number. It's so big. So let's say you have all these people and you have 2 buttons and you have to push one of them. The first button says all 1 Googleplex of those people, 10 to the 10 to the 100 of those people, are going to suffer a millisecond of discomfort when a speck of dust is going to fly into their eye. And they have to blink, or they have to wipe it out, or they have to rub their eyes. Just a millisecond. But it's going to happen to everyone. And it's going to happen to more people than there are atoms in the universe. That's one of the buttons. The other button says 1 person from that Googleplex of people will be tortured for 50 years nonstop in hopeless agony, no chance of any kind of rest or respite for 50 long years are going to be tortured. When I first heard about this thought experiment, I got mad because the author of it laid it out and then said, I think the solution is obvious. What about you? Without saying which, side of the argument they were actually on. And based on other things they had written, I guessed correctly that they were on the torture side of the argument, which they were. They would torture a person for 50 years, one person out of a Googleplex of people. They would torture them for 50 years rather than let all of those people suffer momentarily for 1 millisecond. And to them, it's a simple math problem. Let's say the piece of dust flying in your eye and you having to rub it out or blink or whatever is 1 point of hurt or discomfort. And let's say torturing a person for 50 years is 1 trillion points of hurt. Well, if a Googleplex of people all suffer 1 point of hurt versus one person suffering, 100 trillion points of hurt, the math is simple. Torture is less hurt being introduced into the universe than all those people, countless people being inconvenienced for a second. Now, I fall squarely in the dust speck. I'm going to push the dust speck button and inflict everybody on, this massive universe of people with a millisecond of discomfort. I suppose it's because I am gladly willing to suffer that so that someone doesn't get tortured for 50 years. The worst argument I ever heard against it was that, oh, well, those people didn't consent to getting dust in their eye. Well, the tortured person didn't consent to getting tortured. And what's going to happen to them without consent is far worse than what's the dust in the eye. So somebody's going to get someone's going to experience discomfort, basically, right? I used to think that people that picked the torture button were bad people. Later on, I realized that it wasn't the outcome that was making me distressed, and it wasn't the question that was making me distressed. It was my own emotions regarding torture. I think torture is horrible. And anyone willing to inflict that on someone must be a horrible person. But in their minds, they are protecting one Googleplex of people. I do think this thought experiment kind of falls apart if the one Googleplex of people know that a person's getting tortured so that they don't have to get dust in their eye. To me, that negates the math. That would distress them, and the scales would tip in the other direction. So that pushing the torture button would, in fact, inflict more harm on the universe than the dust. Because if 1/3 of those people were distressed, hey, if 1/10 of those people were distressed, it would far outweigh the torture harm. So I guess you have to assume that they don't ever find out, and that you're doing this outside of space and time. You're standing in a booth watching all their lives, and you have to pick between these two outcomes. Of course, someone may say, you know, a speck of dust wouldn't even register on a scale that includes torture. It wouldn't even, you know, I gave it arbitrary values earlier of 1 point of hurt versus 100 trillion points of hurt, but you're overthinking it if you do that. Just imagine then that it's a splinter in everyone's hand, that everyone stubs their toe, that everyone, you know, sprains their wrist, whatever it is that will register as a, even though it's nowhere near the torture, if it's on the scale of torture, you know, as a low number, then it adds up as you inflict it on more and more people at the same time. You know, we have this moral narrative that we carry with us that suffering is bad, and it's easy to quantify the suffering of torture. And it's much less easy to quantify the momentary discomfort of an infinitely large number of people. It's not infinite, but it's so high that it might as well be to our minds. We can't fathom that number of people. So we have these codes that try to put us all into little boxes, like, you know, the D&D alignment chart. You may say, oh, well, this person's chaotic good, or this person's lawful evil. Or you may say, oh, this person is chaotic good, they're a protector, and this person's lawful evil, they're a punisher. The punisher cares about others. They just think the best way to protect those people is to maintain the system, even if it hurts individuals. So you can't just put them in the lawful evil category. I think they are lawful, but I wouldn't say that they're necessarily good, neutral, or evil. They're trying to do the least amount of harm, just like the protector is. There are other systems that we use all the time that I'm sure that people are familiar with. Givers versus takers. I used to think about this one a little bit. That there are people that give of themselves freely, and there are people that take freely. Like, you leave a bowl of candy out on your front step at Halloween, and that's a giver. But then a taker comes along and just takes everything, pours it right into their bag. They don't care about other people getting candy. I've read of one called The Ask versus Guess, where the asker thinks it's okay to ask for anything and expect to be told no a lot, and that's okay. Whereas the guesser wants to be sure that the answer would be yes before they ask for it. And so they miss out on a lot of opportunity. The asker never misses out. They just get told no. So what happens when an asker meets a guesser? You know, they clash, there's friction, there's discomfort. And of course, you have other systems like conservative versus liberal, or boomers versus millennials, or millennials versus Gen Z. We categorize people by the year they were born and assume that they all went through the same thing and all reacted to the same things in the same ways. I mean, we categorize people by the month that they were born. We assume that all Aries have various traits, and all Libras and Cancers have various traits that they share in common. tribalism is related to this as well. If our sports team is playing another team, we may assume things about their fans. You know, oh, you're a bad person because you like this team, or you are rude and uncouth, and my fellow fans are noble and heroic, and you are barbaric. We build these systems because the alternative to them is just too terrifying to comprehend. You know, if we don't have ways to categorize things, then there's too much information, there's too much signal to know, or there's too much noise and not enough signal for us to make good decisions. We're scrambling to find, you know, every second of our lives, we're scrambling to find more and more information so that we can make better decisions. But if we can just put things into boxes and think about them in simplified terms, that frees up time and mental power to do other things. And ultimately, it's not even about finding the truth. It's not about finding the grand unifying theory of everything. It's about getting through the day. Of course, some people do try to make it a grand unifying theory, but it's not really what it's about. It's about us trying to survive.